This week on Talk by Turner, we're chatting with a debut author about her writing process, her journey to get published, how she cultivates creativity in her life, and more. We'll also dive into her novel, which is set on Virginia's Appalachian frontier during the Civil War, and what the process was like doing research for that historical period, and how she balances accuracy with good storytelling. Let's get into it. I'm your host, Jeffrey Colon, and you're listening to Talk by Turner. Talk by Turner dives deep into intellectual discovery while examining what's happening in our world right here, right now. Join us each week to hear from industry experts and published authors as they share their knowledge and insight on today's most important topics. Now, let's see who's on this week's episode. This week, we're joined by Cathy Rigg, whose debut novel, That Which Binds Us, was released earlier this week. Cathy was born and raised in the Appalachian Mountains of Southwest Virginia, where her people, on her mother's side, go back generations. Her book takes place in that region right as the Civil War breaks out and follows the fates of 5 people as they grapple with the devastating effects of this conflict. Cathy, welcome to Talk.
Hey, Jeffrey, thanks so much for having me.
So how did your background and family history in Appalachia impact the story you told in your novel?
Yes, That Which Binds Us, my novel, is a work of historical fiction, and it is the story of 5 people whose lives intersect in the remote Appalachian Mountains of Virginia at the time of the Civil War. In the middle of that is our heroine, Elizabeth Young, who's a girl who comes of age against this extraordinary backdrop. She witnesses the hanging of her beloved uncle. She looks that situation over and says, there is more here than meets the eye, and I'm going to get to the bottom of it. And then she vows, when I do, I'm getting away from these godforsaken mountains. I'm going to go where it's flat. I'm going where there is room for dreams to grow, and I'm going to build a life of my own choosing. Needless to say, fate has another idea as into her life come these strangers, and their lives cross and they change each other in ways that they never could have imagined. And the novel really becomes a study in the ways that we impact each other and the way that our lives are changed through those interactions. As to my family history, I grew up in those very mountains, the mountains where this takes place. And even at the time that I was there, which was in the 70s, I was a teenager in the 70s, which I always say is the greatest decade ever. I'm so happy that that was my time there. Even then, those mountains were very, very rugged and very isolating. It's just tough to get across into them, and it's difficult to get out. And certainly that created a very insular environment for this novel. And that was fun to explore as people wanted to both get in and leave. And of course, it became an integral part of the Civil War narrative as it happened then and as it appears in the story. It was just a remote, wild, rugged place.
So when writing historical fiction, how do you balance the art of being factually accurate with leaving space to explore the emotional nuances of the characters?
That is the joy and the challenge. And I think the fun factor in reading historical fiction is you really have to do both. You get to do both. For me, with this novel, getting the facts right was really, really important to me, getting the history right. First of all, want to, pay homage and be respectful to the people whose land that is and who have been there like my family for generations. I want to tell an accurate history. That doesn't always happen. So that was a really important thing for me. Another thing is, as a writer of historical fiction, I know that my readers are going to trust me if they feel like they're in good hands. And a way to prove that you're in good hands is to let them know that you've done your homework and you know of what you speak and write. So both of those things made the research really, really important. What that did for me in creating the novel is it really gave me a scaffolding. It provided a structure for the story. There are some real people who are characters in the novel. There are events that are real. So all of that, helped with timeline and with plotting for sure. The real fun part, though, becomes the human part of it. And that's what history doesn't always teach us. You can study history in high school or in college or in books today, and it's all pretty factual. What historical fiction does and what storytelling does is it allows us to humanize all of those emotions. And we as people want to find other people with whom we can connect. And historical fiction does that in an interesting way because these are people who were often hundreds and hundreds of years ago, but we're all just human beings. So it was really, really fun to build that and explore it.
So, as you noted, your novel takes place during the Civil War. It's a time of extreme division in the country, yet the title and themes of the book are more about what unites us rather than what divides us. So, why did you choose to explore this theme in the book? And what do you hope readers will take away from the ideas that you present?
I didn't set out to write a Civil War novel. I started doing research as I began to think about what my story might be about. And I came upon a couple of real people whose lives, even though I only had a tiny window in, I found very intriguing. I had that idea and that thought of, wow, I wonder what that was like. And so that was the germ that started this novel. As I started writing, to tell you the absolute truth about it, I realized, oh, wow, this time frame is the Civil War. And that is obviously something I'm not going to be able to ignore. It actually ended up being really a gift to me in the telling of the story because I learned as I researched that was a very, very different war in those rugged, remote mountains. And exploring that and studying that and bringing that into the novel made both the land an important part of it, but also the people had an experience that we haven't read about before. So that was a really fun thing to write about. In terms of how it ended up, that what I think the takeaway from this novel is that we're more alike than we are different is really something that the characters taught me. I didn't know that. I wasn't driving toward that conclusion. But as I created these characters and put them in situations where they react to each other, they are changed by each other, what I discovered was that as people, our nature is to lift each other up. As people, even though we may be different religions, we may have vastly different cultures, our experiences are different, we still are at the core all just people, and we have way more in common than tears us apart.
That Which Binds Us is your debut novel. So, what has been the most challenging and most rewarding part of writing this book?
Oh, goodness. I think the most challenging part really has been the tenacity that was required to write and finish and get a publishing deal. I started this novel more than 10 years ago, so I have spent a good bit of my adult life working on it. And there were just so many times when I thought, is this the right use of my time? Um, I was very, very lucky that I had a lot of friends and family who supported this work and who continue to cheer me on. I had a lot of writers I admire who have really gone to bat for this novel. So that made it all tenable. But there is a lot of rejection in writing and publishing, and you got to really have the passion for it. And I'm proud of that. I'm glad that I had the tenacity to finish it. and I'm proud of it. So I think when I look at what is the best part, because that was also a part of the question, the best part was actually just holding that book in my hands. It is a glorious moment when something that you've worked so hard on is tangible and right there. So that was a very, very joyful part of it.
I'm curious, the time of day when you did your best writing. Was it during the middle of the day or like late at night? I'm just curious. As a fellow author, I always have to ask this question.
I love that question because it's something that I learned about myself in doing the writing for this novel. I am much, much better the earlier I start. I tended to get up before the sun came up because I like that really quiet time, particularly in the first draft stages of this novel when it really requires imagination. And I would write early in the morning, and I'd never known that about myself. I do say, and I believe this to be true, it's important as a writer to be able to write anywhere at any time. And of course, that's something that I did do. It depended on my life at the time. It's just that if I wrote at 4 o'clock in the afternoon when I was more tired and a lot of things had already happened during the day, it took me longer. In the morning when I'm fresh, that was when most of the magic happened.
Do you have advice for people who may ask the question on, how should they jump into a new venture? Many times, if they're held back by, oh, it's too late for me to try this, or it's too late for me to do this. What would you say to that?
Well, I don't think it's ever too late. I am a big believer in starting and learning and doing new things. And I love an entrepreneurial spirit. I have a big belief in just try it and see what, I mean, what's the worst thing that can happen is kind of a theme in my life. Having said that, I think especially when you are of an age as I am and as many of my friends are, it's such a different time in life when the world opens up to you a bit, when you are stepping back from a career that you've had for many, many years. Your children are grown and gone and living their own lives, and you suddenly have the luxury of making some choices about what you want your life to look like. For many people, that I think can be a little paralyzing. It's very overwhelming. I'm lucky in that didn't happen to me. I stepped back from my career to write the novel. I knew what I wanted to do. So I perhaps had an easier time of it because I knew that. But if you're considering it, I strongly encourage you to, first of all, decide to do something, decide what it is, and just make the decision that you're going to go for it. And then, second of all, I think start small. You don't have to. You don't have to start being a writer by writing a novel. Start by getting a notebook or a piece of notebook paper and write, the first memory you have, or write about the kitchen that was in the house where you grew up, or just make a list of things you remember about your grandmother or your grandfather. That's a start. And just do that, and then the next day come back and do another little bit and another little bit, and it'll happen.
So let's turn that question toward you, because I asked you, how would you answer to someone who asked you the question of, how do I start? Am I too late in starting something? What pushed you personally to make this leap and take a chance on yourself to write this book and put it out in the world at the stage of life you're in?
Yes, it's a great question, and I love the answer to this question. The truth is that my husband and I had gone home to these very mountains where the novel takes place for my mom's funeral in 2013. And as we were leaving that, and I was very much leaving my homeland and really my anchor there, even though I lived in South Carolina, the feeling just came over me that it was time for me to write a novel and that it needed to be a novel of that place. And I felt it so strongly in that car that I said it out loud to my husband. I said, I have just decided I'm going to write a novel. It is going to be of these mountains, and the time has come. I've thought a lot about what that was, and I really believe that in many ways, it is that ancestral pull in those hills. You know, the Appalachian culture itself is very matriarchal. The matriarch really has has the power. And I love that. And when I look at my maternal line, both my mother and my grandmother, and then certainly my great great grandmother, and on back. I think I've traced 7 generations there in those mountains and those hills, and I think that they called to me and wanted a story told. And I think that my grandmother has been with me with every word that I have written, and I'm very very grateful for that. So the big draw for me was really, I think, that push that I felt come from those in my family who had come before.
Let me ask you about your writing process. What does it look like? And did it change as you got deeper into writing this novel?
Yes. I've often thought that I wish I had started this when I was in my 20s. I might have an MFA, and I might have been better prepared to tackle something as overwhelming as a novel. As it was, I just made the decision to do it, and I researched for some time and got that kernel of what it was going to be about, and I just started writing. At that time, in doing that first draft, what I didn't know is that a first draft is just big and messy, and you got to take the time. You got to figure out what the story is. You got to learn who the characters are. You've got to develop their backstories. And that for me was very exciting work, but it's also just very daily work. So I would get up early, as I mentioned a minute ago, and I set for myself, so that I wouldn't get too overwhelmed, a goal of 300 words a day. I learned that many of us have from Anne Lamott. It's her beautiful book, Bird by Bird. And she says, if you just do 300 words a day, by the end of the year, you can have a novel. So I approached the first draft from that standpoint. Certainly, many days I wrote a lot more than 300. But my rule for myself was, if I get 300 words, then I can go do the laundry or go play outside or go hike or do whatever it was that I thought I might want to do to relieve some of that pressure. So that was the first draft. What changed was, as I got into editing drafts, the objective was different, and therefore the really the process became different. After the first draft, then you start to prune and shape. And then after you prune and shape, you really refine. And then after you refine, that's when you get to the fun part of really polishing and hoping that you can make the sentences and the paragraphs and the scenes really sing. And so that's some roll up your sleeves and get down to it and do the work.
What does living a creative life mean to you?
I'm very passionate about the thought of living a creative life. It's something that I have always done from the time I was a little girl in my bedroom, writing poetry and making my own little books of it. And I think particularly as we move through different phases of life and as we age, always making ourselves open and aware of and seeking new experiences that are interesting and different. I think creativity is really just that beautiful spark that makes anything exciting and that makes something new and that feels worth exploring. So whether your passion is sewing or pottery or music or gardening or needlework or writing, whatever it is, as long as you can stay curious enough to really feel like you're going to explore and find and look for the wow and just keep yourself new and fresh. I think that's the real value of a creative life. One other thing that I will say about that too is there are so many people who say to me, because I talk about this a lot just because it's a passion of mine, and often I hear people say, I'm just not creative. If only I were creative. And the reality is everyone is creative. We are born creative. All of us are still creative. You just got to let that joy and that curiosity come forth. And particularly as we age, I think that's really important.
What's one piece of advice you would tell someone who asks, I have a creative passion, I just can't build it into a habit. What do I do here, Cathy, to build it into a habit? What advice would you give?
The first thing, of course, is just start. It is so difficult to get started. And, as I mentioned, when I began this novel, I just sat down one day and started writing. That's the real secret. You just get started. And then realizing that you just need to do a little bit every day. I mean, you start and you just keep at it. You go one day and the next day and the next day. And before you know it, you will have created something that you are excited about and that you will want to bring into the world. And then I promise you that the world needs, that the world wants. So, yeah, I think it's a matter of just actually doing something and getting going, and then a little each day.
What's the primary emotion you want readers to be left with after reading this novel?
I guess what it comes down to is really maybe hopefulness. The world can feel so dire. It does today. It certainly did during the time of the Civil War. But I think for people who read this book, if they can feel that sense of hopefulness, I think hope might even be more powerful than love. There's a lot of love in this book as well. But that belief that tomorrow is going to be better is just so strong and powerful. So,
what's one thing you want listeners to take away from today's discussion?
I think a key thing for my life that has resulted in this novel, but it's certainly way bigger than this novel, is to be willing to always put yourself out there a little bit, learn new things. Technology is overwhelming to me now. It's been my career, and yet today, everything I do, there's a new challenge. I think that is a really important thing to try to tackle as you age. It has brought a lot of excitement and just a lot of joy and connection with other people. So I think that's what I would say.
Where can listeners find you online?
You can find everything about me and about this particular novel at my website, which is cathyrigg.com. I am also on the socials on Facebook and Instagram at cathyrigauthor.com. And you can find the novel, That Which Binds Us, at turnerpublishing.com via our friends at Turner who published this novel, and really anywhere that books are sold.
Cathy Rigg, thank you for joining us on Talk by Turner.
Thank you, Jeffrey. It has been a
Enjoying
pleasure.
episodes of Talk by Turner? Don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe now. Watch us weekly on YouTube, Spotify, or the podcast service of your choice.